Imagine waking up one morning to find a stranger living inside you. They know your every secret, your hidden fears, your suppressed anger, your forbidden desires. They whisper in your ear when you make choices, steering you toward paths you can't quite explain. And though you rarely acknowledge their presence, you feel their influence everywhere. In the shame you bury, in the envy you hide, in the impulses you deny. Now ask yourself, what if this stranger isn't really a stranger at all? What if it is you, just the part of you you've refused to meet? Most people walk through life believing they are singular, whole, consistent. They think their identity is the sum of their conscious choices, their values, their goals, their cultivated personality. But lurking beneath the surface is a hidden double, the shadow self. It carries everything you've rejected, everything society told you was unacceptable, everything you decided was not me. You tell yourself you're kind, so you bury your cruelty. You tell yourself you're selfless, so you repress your hunger for recognition. You tell yourself you're strong, so you exile your weakness. Piece by piece, the rejected fragments of who you are sink into the unconscious. But they don't disappear, they wait. And in that waiting, they grow powerful. Here is the paradox that unsettles every thoughtful mind. The very parts of yourself you most deny are often the ones that secretly control you. What you refuse to face in the light rules you from the shadows. Is it not strange, then, that the more you insist on being good, the more destructive impulses sneak into your relationships? Or that the harder you work to maintain control, the more compulsions rise up when no one is watching? Do you ever wonder why the anger you swallow resurfaces as bitterness? Or why the envy you dismiss turns into quiet resentment, corroding trust like rust on steel? Carl Jung called this the shadow, and he warned that unless you make it conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But what does that mean for you? If the shadow is so integral, what happens if you keep refusing it? Look around at the world and you will see this dynamic everywhere. Politicians rail against corruption while secretly feeding their greed. Priests condemn sin only to fall into scandal. Activists preach love while seething with hatred toward their enemies. And in your own life, maybe you've noticed how the very trait you condemn in others is often hiding inside you. Do you despise arrogance? Then perhaps part of you longs for the freedom to be bold. Do you loathe dishonesty? Perhaps a portion of you is tired of suffocating under truth you can't bear to say out loud. This is the riddle of the shadow. It is not simply darkness or evil. It is the unlived life, the disowned potential, the hidden energy that could either destroy you or transform you. And this is where the question begins to sting. Are you truly yourself, or are you merely the polished mask you wear for the world? If the mask cracks, what might come through? If you dared to lift the lid, what would you find beneath? And could it be that the very traits you run from are also the keys to your deepest strength? Most people will never dare to look. They will go on pretending the shadow isn't there. But you, standing here now, are faced with the uncomfortable truth. You are more than the self you think you are. You are also the self you cannot bear to admit. And so the great question emerges, one that has haunted philosophers, psychologists, and seekers for centuries. What happens when you finally confront the hidden power of your shadow self? That is where our journey begins.
The shadow does not announce itself with fanfare. It is subtle, insidious, creeping into your life through whispers, slips of the tongue, and sudden impulses you cannot explain. You think you are in control, yet how many times have you acted against your own values? spoken words you swore you would never say, or sabotaged the very goals you worked tirelessly to achieve. The uncomfortable truth is this: you are not one, but many. And the parts you try hardest to exile become the ones that shape your destiny from behind the scenes. Carl Jung argued that the human psyche is like a house. The conscious self lives in the well-lit rooms, the spaces decorated for visitors, filled with things you are proud to display. But hidden in the basement are boxes of items you don't want anyone to see. Anger, shame, lust, weakness, envy, despair. Over time, you forget what you've put there. Yet in the dark, these boxes don't sit idle. They leak, they whisper, they demand. And if you do not open them willingly, they will force their way into your life through dreams, slips, and compulsions. They might even disguise themselves as fate, accidents, failures, betrayals you feel powerless to stop. But why do we hide these parts of ourselves in the first place? Why are we at war with our own nature? The answer lies in the intersection of psychology and society. From childhood, you are taught to present a version of yourself that will be accepted. If you express rage, you are told to calm down. If you cry, you are told to toughen up. If you show vulnerability, you are told to be strong. Slowly, you learn that only certain traits bring love and safety. The rest, no matter how natural, become unacceptable. So you split. You build a mask, a persona, to win approval. You tell yourself, "This is me." But beneath it, the rejected self grows, swelling with all the energy you deny. Jung warned that this repression creates not only personal neuroses, but collective ones. A society that demonizes weakness breeds cruelty. A culture that denies sexuality breeds perversion. A civilization that worships rationality gives birth to its own irrational outbursts of violence. This is where philosophy sharpens the point. Friedrich Nietzsche, with his piercing gaze into the human soul, saw repression not as morality, but as sickness. He argued that denying the fullness of your instincts leads not to purity, but to decay. "Beware," he wrote, "lest in casting out your demons, you cast out the best thing in you." For Nietzsche, what we call evil often contains the seeds of vitality, strength, and creativity, if only we have the courage to face it. Arthur Schopenhauer, the darker philosopher of the will, added another layer. He believed that beneath all conscious thought lies a blind, irrational force, the will to live, that drives every action, every desire, every hunger. Try as you might to polish yourself into civility, the raw, chaotic energy of the will breaks through. You cannot escape it, only mask it. Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialist par excellence, saw the shadow in another way. For him, self-deception, what he called bad faith, is humanity's most persistent habit. We lie to ourselves, pretending to be less free than we are, hiding behind social roles and excuses. Why? Because confronting the fullness of truth of who we are, including the shadow, is terrifying. Freedom is heavy, and so we retreat into masks. Even modern psychology echoes these truths. Gabor Mate, writing on trauma and addiction, shows how the shadow forms not only from repressed instincts, but from unmet needs. The child who learns it is unsafe to cry doesn't stop needing comfort. Instead, the need burrows into the unconscious, where it festers into anxiety, compulsions, or addictions. The shadow, in this view, is the graveyard of unmet needs. a place where the self hides its wounds. But here is the irony. What you exile does not vanish. It seeks expression. It claws at the walls of your persona, bursting through in the form of destructive relationships, compulsive habits, and irrational fears. Like a prisoner tapping on the walls of its cell, your shadow calls to you. Ignore it, and it will find more violent ways to be heard. The problem is not just personal, it is civilizational. Look at the patterns of history, and you will see the collective shadow at work. Entire societies repress qualities they cannot integrate. A culture obsessed with purity births corruption. A nation that denies its aggression unleashes war. A generation that worships productivity breeds burnout and despair. The hidden power of the shadow is not that it destroys, but that it shapes. It is the invisible sculptor of your identity, carving who you are from what you refuse to face. Every time you say, "I am not like that," a part of you is cast into exile. Every time you deny a truth within yourself, it takes root underground, becoming stronger, stranger, more dangerous. And yet, hidden in this darkness is also potential. Jung insisted that the shadow is not merely the seat of evil, but the treasury of the soul. Inside those rejected parts lie talents you've disowned, passions you've suppressed, strengths you've mistaken for weakness. Your shadow is both your saboteur and your secret ally. The question then is no longer whether you have a shadow, you do. The question is, will you keep letting it control you from the dark, or will you dare to face it, risking the discomfort that comes with meeting yourself fully? This is the problem we must now confront. Not the shadow itself, but our refusal to look at it. And until we do, it will continue to write the story of our lives in invisible ink.
What happens when you spend your life running from your shadow? At first, nothing obvious. On the surface, you may appear successful, polite, in control. You maintain the mask, smiling in public, efficient at work, agreeable with friends. But beneath that calm exterior, something begins to fracture. The shadow, denied its place, seeps into your existence in ways both subtle and devastating. It starts small, an unexplained irritation at someone close to you, a recurring dream that unsettles your sleep, a moment of rage out of proportion to the situation. You tell yourself it's just stress, bad luck, or someone else's fault. But the pattern repeats. The anger grows sharper, the envy deeper, the compulsions harder to resist. Soon your life is no longer shaped by your conscious values, but by the very forces you swore to banish. The unseen consequence of denying your shadow is that it does not go away, it grows stronger. Think of it like this. Repression is not deletion, it is storage. Every rejected emotion, every silenced desire, every shameful impulse you push into the basement of the unconscious stays there, waiting. And like any neglected space, it begins to rot. Mold spreads. The air grows thick. Strange creatures thrive in the dark. When the door finally bursts open, you are overwhelmed by the sheer force of what you refuse to face. Cognitive psychology gives us language for this. Consider projection, the tendency to see in others what we cannot bear to admit in ourselves. You despise arrogance in your colleague, yet secretly you crave recognition. You condemn dishonesty in a friend, yet you bend the truth to protect your own image. You find yourself repeatedly clashing with people who embody the very qualities you most hate, not realizing you are staring into a mirror. This is why relationships often carry the weight of the shadow. We fall in love with people who embody our unexpressed desires. We despise those who reflect our repressed flaws.
Intimacy becomes dangerous because the closer someone gets to us, the more they awaken the parts of ourselves we are desperate to hide. How many friendships have fractured under the weight of unspoken envy? How many marriages have burned because unacknowledged shadows poisoned the bond? And it does not end with personal relationships. The shadow leaks into the structures of society. History is full of examples. Societies that prided themselves on enlightenment yet descended into violence. Cultures obsessed with order that birthed chaos. Collective shadows are powerful because entire groups can collude in denial. Nations project their own flaws onto enemies. Communities scapegoat outsiders, blaming them for problems rooted within. When the collective shadow erupts, the result is war, oppression, genocide. But even at the individual level, the shadow shapes destiny in quieter, more insidious ways. How many careers have been sabotaged by unacknowledged fear of success? How many lives have been derailed by addictions born from unmet needs? The workaholic insists he is disciplined, but beneath the surface lies terror of inadequacy. The perfectionist claims to pursue excellence, but underneath fester shame and fear of rejection. The irony is sharp. The more you insist you are nothing like your shadow, the more it defines you. You deny your selfishness, and so you manipulate in subtle ways. You reject your vulnerability, and so you lash out in cruelty. You repress your anger, and so it festers into bitterness that poisons everything you touch. Neurology reinforces this point. Studies of the brain show that suppressed emotions do not vanish, they register physiologically. Stress hormones flood the body, reshaping neural pathways, weakening the immune system. The shadow, unacknowledged, can make you sick, not metaphorically, but literally. Anxiety, depression, chronic illness often find their roots in prolonged denial of the self. And then there are the dreams, the nightly theater of the unconscious. Jung called them messages from the shadow, attempts by the psyche to balance itself. A recurring nightmare, a bizarre symbol, a strange character that appears again and again are not random. They are signals, fragments of your shadow self demanding to be seen. Ignore them, and they intensify. The greatest tragedy of the unseen shadow is not merely the suffering it causes, but the life it steals. Every fragment you repress is not only a threat, it is also potential. The anger you suppress could become courage. The envy you deny could become aspiration. The vulnerability you exile could become intimacy. By rejecting the shadow, you reject your wholeness. And so the consequences are twofold: destruction and loss. Destruction because the shadow leaks into your life in harmful ways, corroding relationships, sabotaging goals, breeding illness. Loss because in refusing the shadow, you also refuse the fullness of your humanity. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what have you lost by refusing to face your own shadow? Which parts of yourself lie dormant, exiled, forgotten? And if you continue to deny them, what price will you pay tomorrow, next year, or on your deathbed? The shadow will not stop knocking, and if you do not open the door willingly, it will break it down. This realization brings us to a turning point. If repression leads only to suffering, and denial strengthens the very forces we fear, then the path forward is clear but daunting. To rebel against the instinct to hide, to turn toward the shadow rather than away. The question now is not whether the shadow exists, it does. The question is, how do you break free from its tyranny?
Rebellion does not always look like revolution in the streets. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the dim silence of your own mind. The greatest rebellion you can wage is not against the world outside, but against the comfortable lie you've told yourself about who you are.
To break free from the shadow's grip, you must first dare to see it, not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a teacher to be acknowledged. This is where the path grows counterintuitive. Freedom does not come from rejecting the shadow, but from inviting it into the light. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Enlightenment is not floating above your flaws, it is descending into them, excavating their roots and discovering the hidden truths they conceal. Imagine sitting alone in a room, facing the parts of yourself you've always avoided, the envy you feel toward your friends, the rage you swallow when someone disrespects you, the loneliness you hide behind busyness. At first, this confrontation feels unbearable, like staring into a mirror that shows not your face, but every impulse you've tried to bury. Yet if you can hold your gaze, something shifts. You begin to recognize that these impulses are not monsters. They are wounded children, locked away, waiting to be acknowledged. This is the first act of rebellion, radical honesty. Radical honesty requires courage because it strips away excuses. You can no longer say, "I am only this polished persona." You must admit, "I am also jealous, also afraid, also selfish, also fragile." But in that admission, something miraculous occurs. The shadow loses its secret power. What once ruled you in silence is now seen, named, and integrated. The second act of rebellion is ownership. Most people blame their shadow behaviors on external forces. I snapped because of stress, or I cheated because of loneliness, or I lied because they wouldn't understand. But the shadow thrives in this evasion. Ownership means saying, "This came from me. These impulses are mine. I must learn from them, not deny them." Nietzsche called this the will to power, not domination of others, but mastery of the self. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim your own power, to stop scattering it into denial and projection. Every time you own what is yours, you become less a puppet of the unconscious and more the author of your destiny. The third act of rebellion is dialogue. This may sound strange. How can you converse with a part of yourself? But Jung encouraged exactly this through a practice he called active imagination. You close your eyes, summon the image of your shadow, and let it speak. Perhaps it appears as a figure in your dreams or as a voice in your head. You ask, "What do you want from me? What truth are you carrying?" Often the shadow responds with brutal honesty. It tells you what you crave, but are too afraid to admit. It reveals wounds you never healed. It demands you face truths you've long avoided. The fourth act of rebellion is integration. This does not mean acting on every shadow impulse, nor does it mean glorifying darkness. It means recognizing that even your darkest qualities carry energy that can be transformed. Anger can become assertiveness. Envy can become ambition. Fear can become wisdom. What destroys you in the dark can strengthen you in the light. Consider Viktor Frankl, who endured the horror of Nazi concentration camps. He did not deny his suffering. He did not repress the despair. Instead, he transformed it, discovering that meaning itself could be forged in the furnace of pain. This is the essence of integration, to alchemize shadow into strength, turning what once enslaved you into fuel for your becoming. And yet rebellion does not stop at the personal level. To face your shadow is also to resist the collective lies of society. Every culture pressures its members to deny certain qualities. Some value productivity over humanity. Others idolize purity, strength,
or success at all costs. To integrate your shadow is to defy these scripts, to say, I will not amputate parts of myself to fit your mold. In this sense, shadow work is an act of cultural rebellion, a refusal to live as half a human. But let us be honest, the rebellion is never once and done. The shadow does not vanish after a single confrontation. It evolves as you evolve. Each new stage of life reveals new exiles, new fears, new wounds, new desires you must face. Shadow work is not a battle you win, but a practice you commit to. It is a lifelong dialogue with the parts of yourself that remain unseen. So ask yourself now, what would rebellion look like for you? Would it mean admitting the envy you've carried for years, owning the rage you've directed outward, confronting the loneliness you hide behind perfection? Which part of yourself waits in the dark, desperate for your attention? The rebellion begins the moment you stop running, the moment you turn, face the shadow, and say, I see you. I will no longer deny you. That is when the chains loosen. That is when the silent puppeteer loses control. That is when you begin to reclaim the wholeness of who you are. But rebellion is not the end of the story. For when you face the shadow, you uncover not only the parts you feared, but also the ultimate truth that has been waiting all along.
Imagine you spent years running from your own darkness, then more years battling it, resisting, fearing, repressing, and at last, rebelling. You've turned toward the shadow, named it, integrated parts of it. Yet a final question remains. What is the ultimate meaning of this struggle? Why does the shadow exist at all? The answer is paradoxical, almost cruel in its elegance. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your mirror, your compass, your unfinished self. It is not a mistake in your design, but the very condition of your wholeness. All along you thought the shadow was there to sabotage you. But what if the opposite is true? What if the shadow's purpose is to awaken you? The truth is unsettling. Without the shadow, you would remain incomplete, shallow, bound to illusions of purity and control. The shadow forces you to face what you'd rather not see, and in doing so, it reveals who you truly are. Just as light has no meaning without darkness, your conscious self has no depth without the unconscious. Carl Jung wrote, "The gold is in the dark." What he meant was that buried inside the shadow, amid the fear, shame, and forbidden impulses, lies treasure. Not just pain, but potential. Not just wounds, but wisdom. The very qualities you deny hold the keys to your transformation. Consider this. Your anger, once integrated, becomes the courage to set boundaries. Your envy, once owned, becomes the fire to pursue your calling. Your vulnerability, once embraced, becomes the gateway to intimacy. Every shadow is double-edged. Its destructive form on one side, its hidden gift on the other. This is the ultimate realization. The shadow is not only what you fear most about yourself, it is also what you need most to become whole. To see this is to undergo a radical shift in perception. You no longer see yourself as divided between good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. Instead, you recognize yourself as a totality, a paradox of contradictions, light and dark entwined. The goal is not perfection, but integration, not purity, but wholeness. This is why spiritual traditions across cultures echo the same truth in different forms. Taoism speaks of yin and yang, the dark and the light coexisting in harmony. Christianity speaks of descent before resurrection, death before renewal. Alchemy, the ancient art of transformation, sought to turn lead into gold, a metaphor for transmuting the base elements of the self into wisdom. Each points toward the same reality, that wholeness requires embracing what is hidden, ugly, and feared. Think of the myth of the hero. In every story, the hero must enter the underworld, the cave, the belly of the beast. Why? Because that is where the treasure lies. The monster guards the gold. The dragon protects the jewel. The shadow, in your life, plays the same role. It is the guardian of your unclaimed potential. But here lies the final challenge. The shadow does not disappear after you integrate it. Wholeness is not a permanent achievement. It is a living tension. You will always carry darkness, always face impulses that disturb you, always wrestle with contradictions. But instead of seeing this as failure, you begin to see it as the essence of being human. The ultimate truth is not that you conquer your shadow. The ultimate truth is that you dance with it. Imagine yourself standing in a vast hall of mirrors. Some reflections are radiant, others grotesque. In the past, you smashed the ones you hated, turned away from the ones that frightened you. But now you realize, each reflection is you. Each carries a fragment of your story, your possibility, your essence. You cannot shatter them without shattering yourself. So you stop fighting. You begin to walk among the mirrors. You touch them, acknowledge them, even bow to them. And in that act of recognition, something extraordinary happens. The reflections begin to merge. The grotesque and the beautiful, the fearful and the noble, the selfish and the loving, they come together, forming not a fractured mosaic, but a single, unified image. That image is you, whole, flawed, radiant, human. When you understand this, shame loses its grip. Fear loosens its chains. You no longer need to perform perfection, nor to bury imperfection. You live with authenticity, knowing that every part of you has a place. And from this wholeness, something greater emerges: compassion. Because once you've faced your own darkness, you no longer condemn others for theirs. You recognize in their anger, envy, or fear the same struggles you have endured. Instead of judgment, you feel understanding. Instead of distance, you feel connection. The shadow becomes not only a path to your own liberation, but also a bridge to the humanity of others. This is why the journey into the shadow is not selfish. It is revolutionary. A society of people who integrate their shadows would be less driven by projection, less enslaved by hidden shame. They would be more honest, more compassionate, more whole. But the revolution begins with you, right here, right now, with the choice to turn toward the very thing you've been avoiding your entire life. So ask yourself, what truth is your shadow waiting to reveal? What treasure lies buried beneath your fear? What gift hides inside your forbidden impulses? Do not wait until crisis forces you to confront it. Do not wait until the shadow explodes in chaos. The time is now. Stand before the darkness. Enter the cave. Confront the monster. And when you emerge, you will find not only freedom, but a self you never knew was possible. Because the shadow was never your enemy. It was always your guide.